So like, no yelling, swearing. Are we live? Cool, awesome. So hey everybody, I am Jamie. I am a co-host with Esteban. Esteban, stick your hand up, of EdinburghJS. Welcome. It's really good to see some new faces tonight. The meetup is growing and it's really nice to get together with everybody and sort of find out what people do. So we've got people who are experienced developers with 20, 30 years worth under their belts. And we've got some people here who are new developers who have switched into doing things like Code Clan or self-taught stuff. So real range of people in the room tonight. And I think like getting around and chatting to people helps you find jobs, helps you network, find mentors, helps you mentor people. So I really appreciate everybody for coming along. Tonight we've got two talks. We've got a community intro from Ewan. So every month I'm trying to just get someone up who has come along to a meetup or is part of the community just to do a little intro about themselves and what they do. Because I think you can look at lots of tutorials online, but the thing you can't get online is meeting people in the Edinburgh community. So that will be good. And then we're following up with Rory and a talk on D3. Without further ado, Ewan.
All right, so as you've probably guessed, my name is Ewan, funnily enough, and I'm a web developer, although I was speaking to Martin earlier and we were having a conversation about what's the difference between a web developer and a software developer, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. So how I got here, basically in 2016, I left high school. I'd been taking sort of the subjects I sort of found the most fun or interesting or easiest, basically, because I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. But I wanted to move out of my parents' house, get a car, get a motorbike, all sorts of things. And that kind of all necessitated getting a job. And I found an apprenticeship with a small software development company based in the Borders. So basically after completing my apprenticeship there, so a year later, I became a junior web developer. So basically I got into web development by accident. If we fast forward to about 3 months ago, I'd been with IQX for about 6 years, so time really does fly when you start somewhere. And although there was nothing wrong there, and I was very thankful for all the opportunities I'd had there, and sort of very much enjoyed my time working there, I'd sort of decided it was the right time to progress in a career and move on to a new sort of position or a new job. Which I found here in Edinburgh with Opus 2. Now, one thing I was going to mention is about soft skills, because when I was looking for an interview and sort of having been in my previous job and actually been on the other side of the table interviewing some candidates, one thing I found was that soft skills are often just as important as technical ability in an interview, and sometimes even more so. And sort of as programmers, sometimes it's quite easy to get carried away because you're used to dealing with computers all the time, which don't have any feelings yet. But it's sort of when talking to people and working as a part of a team, you've always got to be sort of mindful of that you're speaking to other people and sort of careful at how you're wording stuff to some degree, and try not to be too direct always with everyone. Now, one thing I was going to basically talk about is sort of if you put time and effort into anything and have confidence in yourself, I think you can pretty much achieve anything as long as you're somewhat realistic, maybe short of going to the moon or something like that. So one of the things I was lacking for many years was confidence in myself, and it's kind of difficult to gain. It's not something you can really learn, or it's sort of some people just have it and some people don't. It comes naturally to some people. But if you're sort of more introverted like myself, it doesn't really, and it's sort of very hard. But you sort of need confidence to progress, both in your career and social life and outside of work, basically. Because if you don't have any, you'll generally back away from opportunities. And if something doesn't work out, you won't try it again and so on, which basically means you'll not get anywhere. So 3 months ago, basically, I realized that I'd been at IQX for 6 years and no one was going to push me to take the next step in my career. So I decided to sort of step out of my comfort zone a bit and do that, and sort of ended up at Opus 2, and touch wood, it's all gone really well so far. Really enjoying my time sort of there. All our co-workers are absolutely amazing. It's really, I'm very happy. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. What is your stack that you work with on
Oh, good question. So for the last 6 years, I was working with Angular, initially AngularJS, and then Angular 10. But when I moved to Opus 2, where I've switched to React, basically, which has been interesting because my experience with TypeScript really translates over to React, and you pick it up very quickly, even though it's a completely different framework.
I don't want to preempt anyone's questions. How did you find the experience as an apprentice? What was that like compared to the job that you got afterwards?
I'd say, so the modern apprenticeship I did was sort of like part-time working with, basically in the company doing bits of styling with CSS and learning HTML, as well as a course, I forget the name of what it was, but there's some qualification you get at the end of it. I think it's sort of equivalent to sort of higher or advanced higher level. But it was very interesting. You learn a lot because you're actually working on the job, so you sort of pick up on, you learn how to do stuff in real life as opposed to just following a textbook example.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'm very curious about how the apprenticeship how that works. So you're saying it was like, so what percentage was to sort of learning, you being taught things, and what percentage of the time were you actually working on a code base? And
so to begin with, there was a lot of learning and sort of teaching yourself stuff and following textbooks, although sort of after 6 months or so I'd started to sort of pick up on, I knew CSS by that point and HTML, so I could start picking stuff, and as you sort of learn more and sort of shadow other colleagues, you sort of stuff, and as you sort of learn more and sort of shadow other colleagues, you sort of learn more and more, and eventually you get to the point where you kind of know everything. Well, not everything, but you know enough to teach yourself and sort of figure out how things work on your own.
I'm not familiar with Opus 2 and what they do and what their product is and stuff. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I've never heard of them, to be honest, before I started there, but they provide software to the legal industry and sort of services to the legal industry as well. So it's sort of during sort of presenting evidence, I think. I'm not entirely sure what it is they do, to be honest, but it's providing software to the legal industry, well, so services and software.
Just as a follow-up to that as well, how far can you get away with not understanding what it is that your company does to succeed there?
Well, for the last 6 years where I used to work was at a company called IQX, which deal with recruitment software. And to be honest, I never fully understood some parts of how their software worked. But if I'd looked into it, I probably could have figured it out. But I think it's so much, often applications are so big that you simply can't understand all of it. So it's sort of okay knowing what you know and what you don't know about something.
Yeah, I actually think on that point, that's I think reasonably typical. I find that as well, that I've worked on code bases where I've had to guess what the company does. Essentially, they're like, you don't really need a spec for us to write it, just look at the code. And that doesn't always match up with what they actually really want. So sometimes it is a bit of a kind of balancing act to kind of figure out and actually talk to people. And sometimes people who run companies don't necessarily know exactly what they want from the software. They just kind of know it when they see it, I think. So.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate now at Opus 2 where I work. They generally, when you're given a task, it's very well defined and you get a user story, and so it's fairly well planned out that it's quite clear what you're actually meant to do. Although in the past where I was working previously, there's sometimes when you'll be given a task, but there's no clear sort of way, it doesn't clearly define what's actually expected, and you sort of have to go and find that out yourself.
So you mentioned earlier about your self-confidence, and can you give us any tips on how you boosted your self-confidence to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I think it's a combination of a few things. So I've sort of, for the first time in a long time, I went abroad to a foreign country, completely my own, middle of nowhere, sort of stepping out and doing something you're uncomfortable with, and basically really helps. So something like doing a talk up here.
And just a little follow-up. What's your team like, and what does the team makeup look like, and so on? You mentioned user stories. Where does that come from?
Sort of, most of the developers are split into 2 teams. Now they're about, I don't know, about 10 people in each team, so fairly small, although it's much bigger than the previous place I was working at, where I think the web development team was about 2 people, or 1.5 people. It was very small.
And is it all developers, or other disciplines as well?
It's Opus 2 in Edinburgh, or...
In Opus 2, you mentioned there's 10 people. Are they all developers, or is it different
there's
disciplines?
much more, about 10 people per team, and there's maybe like 20 or so developers working on... they've got a couple different pieces of software, but I'd say maybe 20 to 30 developers. They've got a lot more staff sort of in a supporting role, sort of providing the services, though, using the software.
Yeah, go on.
On your working life, when you get to the office, the tasks that you get assigned to, that you said just like you got to user stories and their tasks are pretty well defined. Do you ever come across puzzling tasks that you actually need to do a lot of thinking to figure out how to do it, or it's more like an instruction manual where you need to just like follow the instructions, do this, this, and that?
So usually, so at least in my experience so far working here, I've only been at Opus 2 for 2 months, so it's somewhat limited. Generally, the story pretty much is quite clear on what it should do from a user's point of view, but it's not necessarily clear from an implementation point of view. Although what I've mostly been working on is smaller stuff where there's already existing code, so you're sort of building into existing code.
Cool, that's very nice, thank you.
But oftentimes you do have to sort of, where at my previous place, you start, if it's something that doesn't exist, you end up having to create something from scratch, which is always interesting.
Awesome.
Cool. Any more questions? Esteban.
Yeah, how did you get your new job? Through LinkedIn, recruiters?
Good question. So I think I applied for one job on LinkedIn or something and one on Indeed. But there's a little checkbox somewhere, I think, which says they might share your CV with a few people, because the next week my phone kept ringing with recruiters. But the interview I had at Opus 2 was funny enough the first one I had, and it went really well. So then I went for an in-person interview, which was, it's difficult to describe when something goes so well, but I knew sort of from, halfway through that interview, I pretty much knew that it was the right place for me to go. So I basically cancelled all my other interviews and just accepted that.
Yeah, what were the steps of the, getting your job, like tech interview?
Oh, good question. So at Opus 2, I didn't have a tech interview. It was mostly just a sort of remote video call interview initially, and then sort of in-person interview covering the experience I've had with Angular at my previous place and how that would translate into React with them. But another company I had an interview with was a tech sort of coding type interview, where they gave me some very obscure function or something I had to create, which was, yeah. So there's a mixture. It depends on what company you go to, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Can everybody thank you? Cheers.
Thank you.
So, Gene to set up. Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Ewan. I love to hear people's stories, because I think everybody can get a little bit of that. There's some people here who will be looking for jobs, and I think it's interesting just to hear the range of types of job interviews, the types of problems that people set, and so on. So I'm sure Ewan will be happy to answer some more questions on the specifics later. So next up, we have Rory, who is trying to navigate off Ewan's slides. Cool. So if anybody wants to do what Ewan just did and did a little intro to themselves, their background, the stack that they've used, maybe a little side project you've made, it can just be a 5-minute talk. It is a good way to build confidence talking about technology. It's also a good way because I'm assuming people will talk to Ewan when he's outside, and you never know what opportunities arise out of that. So if you want to do that, either message us on Twitter at EdinburghJS, or just speak to me and Esteban after. We're going to have 2 more meetups this year, so October meetup, November meetup, and then there'll be a December kind of pub social, non-technical thing, which will be good. So we're basically looking for speakers for both of the next two. The next one, I think, is the 20th, if that's a Thursday, and the November one, we're waiting on a date because the bays aren't available on the date we want. So I'll organise that and tweet about it when it happens. And now, if he's ready.
I'm ready.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, welcome, Rory. Cheers.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hey. Hello. I'm Rory, as Michael already introduced. I'm a developer, trainer, technology consultant. I've had to wear many hats over the years, being self-employed, and I've had to kind of work with lots of different tools, including D3.js, which I'm going to talk to you about. So D3 stands for data-driven documents, and the reason I kind of say it's maybe one of my more the reason I say I've kind of enjoyed it is it kind of like sort of takes me back to kind of a first kind of wow moment when, as a kid, I think with crappy dial-up internet, I found some tutorials about using how to write BASIC and plug some stuff in. I did a little bit whole world tech stuff, but I really had a wow moment when I drew a line on a screen, and I'm like, Mom, look at this. So it's like. So there's something about the kind of visual element, and it's I guess it's a comment on kind of the glory of JavaScript too, in that you've got your browser and you can look at something and you can just immediately start load up the console and sort of immediately bring something to life with a little bit of JavaScript in the console. Before I go any further, actually, how many of you have, a show of hands, how many of you heard of D3.js before today, obviously? Oh, it's a fair, that's like half of yous. And how many of you have built something with D3? Okay, yeah. Oh, well. I mean, it has been around since 2011, so maybe no surprise that there's a fair number of you that have used it. And usually, it's described as a charting library. And if you go and search for comparisons of different chart libraries, you'll get these kind of listicles where D3 will almost always be in there, but it will never clinch the top spots because they'll typically say stuff like, there's a steep learning curve, you need to invest a bit of time before you get something out of it, you need to write lots of code. And those aren't actually, they're more or less actually they're fair comments, but if, however, you go and you read the 2011 academic paper that the authors published accompanying the library, then they actually say that, look, this isn't a kind of free charts out the gates kind of deal. Actually, what we're trying to do here is give you a document manipulation library that allows you to create visuals with web standards, right? So that you should actually think of it as being more similar to something like jQuery or a prototype, but for producing visuals. And in fact, there are plenty of charting libraries that are built on top of D3.js. And these are great solutions if you want to quickly throw some charts out. You've got some data. You don't want to spend much time and to create a bar chart or whatever it is, and add maybe some basic controls. And you don't need that fine-grained control of what's going on. If, on the other hand, you want to create something quite unique visually, or even you might want to create some kind of you might not want to make any kind of data visualizations or charts at all. You might want to just be doing some generative art and just be doing some visual stuff, like this pulsating space worm that is glorious, right? I love it. Then D3 is a good solution for that. On the other hand, of course, you can just use D3 for creating the usual kind of charts and graphs and stuff, because maybe you don't want to be spoon-fed like a baby, or you might want to. You're maybe the sort of person that prefers driving a manual car rather than automatic, because you know how gears work, unlike listicle authors who probably don't. So I wanted to jump into a quick example, a snippet of D3 code and SVG, and we're going to draw something to it. So on the left is an empty SVG, and on the right is a little snippet of D3. And what I'd like to do kind of with this example and like some other visualization I'm going to show you is kind of give you a taste of what the library has to offer, but also cover some of the core concepts that should stand you in good stead if you want to start doing stuff with D3. So my goal with this little snippet here is just to visually represent the data that I've got in this array here. So there's just like 3 elements, 3 values, and I want to draw 3 circles, accompanying circles, onto my SVG. So I'm going to start off by using a CSS selector, so D3 select, and give it the ID. Is everybody kind of familiar with this? Because I know that I've assumed knowledge a bit by saying, oh, this is like jQuery. Does this feel vaguely familiar? OK, that's good. So effectively, we've selected the SVG element, and then we're going to descend into it and select all the child nodes that are circles. As you've probably noticed in this SVG, there are none yet, but let's just hold on to that. The next part brings us to kind of one of the first kind of main concepts that underpin D3, and that is the idea of data binding. The idea that we have so we've got a selection, and we want to attach data to those elements. So for every element in the array, we want a corresponding element or group of elements to represent it visually in the SVG. And then, so following that, we need to decide what's going to happen as a result of that attachment. We want to create some circles and determine what they should look like. So we are going to set attributes like using this attr function. And you can either just hard code stuff. So I've set the color to a dark orange, or I can give it a function. And the function, what happens with the attr function in D3 is the first parameter will be the kind of element, the item of the array. I is the index. So if I run this, hooray, we've got some circles on an SVG. Now, if I were to run this snippet again, if I repeated it over again, what would happen is our selection would find those circles that are already in there, and it tracks the fact that we've got some in there, and we've got corresponding items in the array. Now, in the real world, you're probably doing like interactive visualizations, and the array, your values here are not going to be fixed. You're probably going to want to create some controls, and maybe you're going to filter by group, or you might be sort of panning something around, or reducing something in a time span. If you've tried out some more interesting and fun, kind of more interactive visualizations online, we'll actually have a look at some later to demonstrate this. The library kind of handles these changes in data, and that brings us to a kind of concept, or a pattern that D3 relies on to manage these changes. So the idea of entering, update, and exiting, and just the idea that we're going to, our collection is going to expand. We're going to append values onto it. Our array can grow. It can change. The values itself can change, right? And we need to update accordingly. And things can exit. We can, get rid of elements as well. So to illustrate this, I'm going to alter our snippet just a little bit to randomize the values and the length of the array in there. So we're no longer kind of fixed anymore. And this randomization of the array, and the snippet here is going to run on a 1 second interval. So it updates. It's just running every second, and the graphic updates with the data that's in there. So we're just running this snippet every second. Now, it's not like that interesting, But it starts to get a little bit more interesting when we change the visuals based on what based on the kind of condition of the value. You know, is it being added to the array? Is it entering? Is it updating, or is it exiting? So that join that I had before actually manages those 3 different states, right? So by default, it's kind of this convention over configuration idea that by convention, it's just going to add a circle. It will just update the attributes as if you were entering them, and by default, it will remove them. But we can actually go in and into this join function and provide and determine exactly what should happen in those 3 different states. So in this case, when a new element comes in, then we're going to color it green. And if it's just updating, then we'll color it orange. And in exit, we'll just remove it. To make it a little bit more interesting, we're going to define a transition. So this is a little bit like animating the change in attributes before that remove happens. So anytime a value is like removed from the array, we exit some values, then we're going to change the y coordinate downwards and reduce the opacity. So you get this kind of fading out effect. OK, cool. So the kind of ideas that I've covered here are basically remain across like any data visualization you'll have that you'll see with D3. And there are helpers, and there's like 30 different modules, and there's tons and tons of like little tools, or as it were, to help you create data visualizations from the ground up. So this is things like handling spherical geometry, maps, color scales, and the sort of HSV space. Things to do data manipulation. Like this is actually there's a few elements here that in D3 array, for example, it's kind of almost obsolete actually, because you can do stuff now where you with arrays, like iterating through arrays, and with modern JavaScript, there's actually a sort of equivalent functions that do the same thing. But earlier on, they weren't there. So like finding maximum, minimum, this sort of thing. I will, in the next couple of examples of data visualizations, I'll sort of pick out kind of where these like modules are being used and try and give you an example of them in practice. There are loads of them, so I'm not going to get a chance to show you them all. But just note that D3 is going to split up into kind of like micro libraries. So you can actually use some of these independent from the whole big bundle that's got all of them all together. And so this is one by the author of D3JS, Mike Bostock, I think. And it shows, oh, it's cut off. So it's cut off. Well, basically, it's Icelandic population by age. And so you have age 0, age 105, and it shows like over the year the population kind of, well, of these various ages. And so you literally have population entering, people being born, and people being exited. Like, you know, talk about, you know, like deaths being a statistic. Like death is a data visualization. You know, should make it a pretty one. Anyway, so that's that, you know, enter and update and exit thing in operation there. And D3 gives you the kind of tools to draw other things. So, you know, it's helping to draw these scales here. They're not altering with the data, but let's have a look at a different example. The caffeine simulator. So how long does caffeine stay in your system? So this is a kind of a stacked area chart. And it has like various controls here. So we can say, you know, what happens, how much caffeine will I have in my body over the day if I add some, if I drink coffee at these like various times in the day. These are the milligrams, and this is what's going to are you going to get restful sleep? And one thing I'd like you to notice here is the if you look at the axes and the labels here, are responding to the data that you put in there. So it's not only the actual core graphic of the visualization that's changing with the data. You might want to generate a nice axis, and D3 helps you do that by managing, how high is the kind of viewport or the canvas area, how wide is it, what's the data in there. So there's lots of helpers to help you do that and manage that. Axis generators. Okay. So I also mentioned that there's helpers for doing geographic things. So two things here. One is, so there's a few things going on. There's transitions, so it's turning. There's a projection, right? So we have a globe projection. There's all the other kind of projections that you can imagine, like the weird stretch one or the Mercator projection that people are usually quite familiar with. And it can handle GeoJSON. So the actual, the projection's just like, this is a ball, and I want you to wrap this GeoJSON onto this projection. So there's helpers to sort of take in a GeoJSON file, in this case, the kind of land mass of the Earth and the countries. And so you like that? Yeah, it's cool. Okay. What was I going to say about that? Yeah. So GeoJSON's like describes the shape of the the world map, the land on the map, the land on the Earth, and the different countries and whatnot. And then the projection sort of helps to draw that GeoJSON to this nice globe. And then, of course, there are helpers for doing kind of the event handling, so I can hover over things and then I highlight it. What else do I want to say about this?
Can you spin it fast?
Can I spin it fast? No, can't do it. Yeah. I think I've seen. That's just me going like. Right. Yeah. So it's got an axial tilt as well. That's like quite hard to control. Spinning upside down. Let's do it. Okay. There we go. What else to say about this one? Yeah. Nothing else. If I start interacting there, I can't use my slides.
So does that kind of run on the canvas on the page?
Yeah.
And then there's click handlers, obviously, on top of it, and so you can overlay data on top and like pop-ups.
Yeah, you could do whatever. So like, actually, I'll show you something here. So for today, I thought I would, choose something to visualize, and kind of the incorporations of the tech companies in Edinburgh. I don't know. I felt I was trying to find something vaguely relevant to the meetups that we're in. I went to maybe my first tech kind of meetup in Edinburgh in like 2009, maybe. And I kind of wondered, what has the growth of, the growth of the kind of industry been like in that time? So we've got here from 1980, beginning of time, to to this year, in this dartboard visualization, let's say. This is data from Companies House, and it just shows incorporations within the city. So just to, show you here. So a little transition in there. And I'm using a kind of, let's go back. Yeah, I'm using kind of scale function to position the darts of the company and corporation date on a kind of circular basis. This is completely gratuitous. I mean, I don't know if this is probably not the best way to visualize this, but just, you know, I thought it looked cool. So like, you know, I want to turn like a date, you know, so I've got the data comes in as I think a JSON or a CSV. I'm using the fetch module that goes off and grabs that, and I've got some dates, and I want to turn that into an angle or a position rather on the plot. So there's the idea of the scale function that helps you do that. I skipped a bit. I should mention that this all starts with the help of the kind of fetch helper functions, and again, with like modern JavaScript, you know, you've kind of got fetch function. D3 came up with it early on. But what the kind of quick handy thing it helps you do is when you're getting data remote like a CSV file, it will look at the headers of the CSV, right, the first row, and it will just assume that those are keys, and it will turn the actual cells of the row, as it were, into the value. So for you know, just to speed things up a wee bit, you'll get a collection of JavaScript objects with key value pairs based off of the headings. So that just, you know, helps you do your job a little bit easier. So these are, yeah. What else am I going to say? These are just company and corporations, right? It's not that these companies are still going. In fact, many of them are no longer with us. Now, I think actually, to be honest, a better visualization is this, where the y-axis means nothing really here. It's just been randomized, and the x is time, right? So, in my opinion, from doing this visualization, just let's go back and so that you can see it. Can I not see this? Can I not go back? It's kind of interesting because it kind of feels like there's like maybe 3 or 4 phases of tech companies. There's like the kind of early period where there's not much going on, and then there's a kind of a little middle chunk, things start to pick up, and then there's another kind of slither here, and then the kind of recent past 5 years, there's just stuff going on crazy. I forgot to mention that so I'm hovering over here, and this was in response to your question there, Conrad, was, you know, so I've got an element on the page there. It's probably far too small to read, but the colors kind of correspond to the industry classifications. So when you register a company, you say, you know, what kind of line of business are you in? I've kind of gone off and tried to grab all the kind of software-y, database, anything kind of techy. But if they've added anything else in there, like we work in, you know, in biosciences or military or whatever, then I've, you know, added a color code to it. So that's the idea here, is that there's so many classifications. There's like hundreds of them. You're not going to know what they are. So, you know, with a little hover over, we've got. That's not a very helpful category. What have we got here? Let's have a look. You hover over something, and you get manufacturer of luggage. That's really random combination. Software and manufacturer of luggage. Like, I don't know what that's about. Yeah. I think if any of you want to have a look at, you know, hopefully that's like a little taste for you. If you want to see what other stuff is has been done or can be done with D3, obviously just go to the d3js.org website. Other cool places to like look for visualizations in the wild is I think the Pudding is a kind of data journalist publication. It's like long form data journalism, and they tend to use D3 for stuff. So that is a nice place to go and look at things. Other than that, does anybody have any questions? There's one over there. I don't know if we're doing the mics.
I thought that graphic that you built was really cool, and I think it would also be nice to be like a fun job hunt platform. You could like see all the companies, and maybe you could have kind of a crawler. I don't know, seeing this company is hiring, and all the blue ones are hiring.
There's a bunch of so there's a bunch of companies in there. It's interesting. There's lots of caveats when you start to do this, because this is a sort of visualization thing that generates questions, right? Because that one is maybe your sole directorships, right? So there's like kind of self-employed people like me that have a tech company. But it's not like, is that a proper tech company, right? And then you look and you see there's certain notorious addresses around Edinburgh, these kind of boxes that are mailboxes and are basically just like shell company, and then the directors only live abroad. There's nobody in the UK. So there's not that many of them, maybe like 5 tech. But I noticed, I was like, I didn't expect to see so many kind of tech companies like with that. But yes, absolutely. I mean, look, Company's House, go on Company's House, search, and you can just download a CSV. They've got an API. It doesn't really work that well. You're better off just downloading the CSVs. But yeah, of course, if you were going to start a scraper today for Edinburgh tech companies, like, I can give you the data set, I think. Or can I? Yeah.
Yeah, I used D3 a lot when it was version 3.
Oh, yeah.
And my main reason for coming here is how much different is it if I want to get back into it?
If you want to get back into it, actually, not a lot. I would say not a lot, because I've been trying to put together a couple of screencasts on D3, and there was an example I thought was a great example, and it was like version 5 or something, and I kind of brought it up to version 7, and of course, like finding out what was different was annoying, but it wasn't that different. And I've looked at some really old examples, and it's like, you change a couple of lines, and it's, and the kind of core concepts of how it works and how you should go about doing things, that's all the same. So I think compared to something else that's been going for like 11 years, it's really not a lot at all.
What version is that the latest version of D3 you were showing?
The tech one, the company?
Your code examples, were they still?
Oh, the one. 6, 7.
Cool.
Because the join thing, the dot join, but that's it. Like if we were going to go back to like version 4, I would, you would just need to be a bit more verbose and say, instead of dot join, you'd have like dot enter. And then after that, you'd have dot update and then dot exit. So it's like, it's pretty small beans for converting back to the old versions.
And possibly your second question, because I've been asked this myself. What about D3 and React together?
D3 and React together, there's like a library for it. I've not done any. I've done D3 and Angular to create a custom control. I've
always been a little bit like, just don't bother, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, you probably have to have a pretty specific use case for it, but yeah. One more here, Conrad.
So Rory, what's the thought process you go through when you look at a data set and then you're thinking about a visualization? So how do you come up with a visualization on a data set?
To be honest, I think it's a bit like, I think the best thing to do is to like just throw something down in the first instance. Like that kind of just like, the first thing I did actually with that was not to do the kind of dartboard one, but was actually much closer to that one where I just had it on, just a single sort of horizontally, and then just randomize the Y value, like just, it kind of depends, because there's kind of these visualizations that are there to kind of generate questions, and then there are the ones that are there to answer questions, if that makes sense. But you usually the first thing is just like throw something at it and then go from there. You might have like some kind of art, I don't know, if you're working with somebody else and then they've got like, oh, we want to get this out of it and we want to be a bit more artistic, then, you know, there's maybe some lead to be followed there or kind of some kind of brief, but yeah, don't know. That answer.
You got your like go-to, this is what I'm going to start off with and see whether or not I can find something more interesting when I've seen it on the page.
Yeah, I think just do something and try a few different versions, and then, you know, go from there. Because sometimes there's things you think are going to be interesting, and they're not. They're just not. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. In regards to three things essentially: computational power, memory, and speed. Does it increase as how much does it increase as your animations and your graphics become more complex? And how much more memory would they consume? And should we be worried about making an application slower because we're adding too many graphics or too much?
Yeah. It can depend a lot on what you're doing and how many data points you've got. Like that one there was about 4,000. But I noticed when you change different attributes and you want to animate different attributes, certain things just consume more. Like, so actually changing opacity over 4,000 elements seems to make it struggle. But then, you know, then you can remedy it by like, well, if you want them all to fade out, then you put them in a group and then you make the group fade out. I guess. And then you also have the choice of like using SVG or using Canvas. So you can use web canvas. So if you're doing like loads and loads of points, and then you can sort of start to do. I mean, usually it like can hold up with a lot of data, I find. Yeah, I don't know exact figures. I don't know what to kind of relate back to, but there's kind of workarounds and whatnot, and ways to make it a bit more efficient if you really need to like get into performance.
Okay. And it wouldn't hinder the performance of an application that we have with like, I don't know, static data, like a static graphic would just convert that to a.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's generated SVG, it's just markup. So, you know, once you've used it, once you've, like, maybe, I don't know, for whatever reason, you might want to just, like, generate the graphic, and you'll get basically just a load of SVG markup, and then you could just have that statically ported into it, and then, you know, and then therefore your browser doesn't have to run any JavaScript, or you know, you're just sharing a graphic around. So that, yeah, that's the benefit of the web standards angle of it, I suppose. There's somebody there.
Thank you. If you've generated some, say, SVG with D3, and you also maybe after that wanted to mutate the same SVG with jQuery, is that a one-way trip, or can you come back to the D3? Do more operations on the same SVG?
You could manipulate it. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, you certainly could, because you know, if you're running those selections again, and you know, the D3 will see that like an element has been removed or changed or something. So yes, I mean, you probably, this sounds like complicated. I think yes, it could be done. I mean, this is kind of the benefit of like, yeah, everything being done in the DOM.
If you wanted to make a whole drawing package, say, you know, diagrams.net or Miro or Mural or OmniGraffle, if you've been on the Mac ever.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make that whole thing within the DOM,
yeah,
is it open to collaboration between multiple frameworks, or
yeah,
is
I mean,
D3 going to fight others?
So, for example, there's a library. I mean, I've been looking into this recently. I haven't really got into it yet, but do you know Leaflet.js? It's kind of a mapping library, anyway. So Leaflet.js is like it's kind of it's a handy kind of mapping library because you get your kind of controls for free. So it's just like center the map on London, And here's the zoom level, here's some controls for panning in and out and all this kind of stuff. And it shows, pulls in the tiles from OpenStreetMap. And then you can define what the markers are on the map. And those markers in Leaflet.js can be SVGs. So you can, say you want like some D3 to generate some kind of more elaborate, funky shapes and markers, and then you use Leaflet.js to put those to center those on your map in different places. And actually, that's not a bad way of going about things, because you get so much for free. You get the mapping stuff for free in Leaflet.js, whereas like you want the kind of fine-grained control of like what the SVGs are going to be like in D3, rather than doing the mapping and the going to a lot of work to create the maps in D3 and the kind of whatever visualizations you want to overlay on the map. So. So that makes sense, and I see that there are libraries out there that seem to be doing this. There's a lot of like Angular in D3 and React in D3, Leaflet in D3, Envy D3, etc., etc. So I think it seems to play nicely enough with other things. Yeah.
Hey, what about the learning curve, for example?
Learning curve. It depends how much of the library you need to do, because like, it's like you say, I have learned D3. I mean, you unlikely need to like be able to recreate all the examples here, right? Like, do you need to do the mapping stuff, for example, or do you need to do hierarchies and force-directed graphs and that kind of thing? So there's like learning like what parts of D3, how much of it do you want to learn? And then on top of that, there is, I actually find, I've been like, I've taught people some D3 stuff, and actually I find that, I'm actually kind of, to really get the best out of it, actually once I've covered a bunch of concepts of D3 stuff, actually we're digging into, they're maybe faltering at the JavaScript stuff or the SVG stuff, or like, I've like on CSS it's background color and it's actually fill in SVG, and that trips them up, or like they're just, maybe they want to like maybe they're not like so strong with the JavaScript or the functional programming and stuff like that. So if you know your JavaScript really well, then I don't know, if what I showed you felt okay, then maybe you'll get on with it. Yeah.
For example, your example was really impressive. So how long can I take to make it, or is it straightforward, or I have to do a lot of work for it?
How long is this piece of string? That's if that made sense, you could copy and paste that, and think, okay, I don't want circles, I want something else, or I want this, I want something else. But there's just a few things. There's a few things, like if you understand like what's going on under the hood, and then once you realize like, okay, this is, the best way to look at it is like look at the examples, inspect them, see what SVG is being generated, then go back to the code, and then be like, okay, where did it append that element, and where did it start to say that, and then you can work backwards from there. So I think there is, obviously, it's like if you just want to bang out some charts like quickly, then don't use this.
Okay.
Right? Absolutely don't. But if you want to like create things in a very custom like way, then I'd say that's like the best way to do that. Medium? I think it's medium. I don't think it's hard. Actually, right. I'll put a stake in the ground. I'd say, look, medium difficulty. It's not just easy, but it follows a pattern, and all of these things follow the kind of same, more or less, they kind of follow a certain a certain pattern. But if you go and look at some of like, you know, the code for dragging and calculating, where, you know, like I've got that. I was like dragging around that globe map, and you know, there's stuff, and it shows you the distance between things, and then you know, it's going through the Euler angles, and I'm like, what? Like this is, I can't understand this, but that's because I'm not good at math. So like, it's not to do with, you know, the D3 part. It's actually D3 plus something else that you're doing with it. So I'd say it's medium difficult.
Okay.
There we go. Medium.
Last question. What about the community support?
Community. Community is actually yeah. It's a really good question. You know, actually the author and the kind of core team are actually really invested in sort of readability, productivity, and the author of the D3 library is also the creator of this platform that's called Observable. And this is kind of a like reactive programming environment. So shortening that kind of time between, I'm writing a little bit of code, I'm trying some things out, I'm poking around, and like I want it to quickly see the effect of my input. Observable is fantastic at arranging that for you. So first off, the kind of authors are really keen on like building tools around it. Then there's like tons and tons of examples. This is a bit like a notebook kind of community. Like if you know Python notebooks, then you've got all of that there, and there's just like a massive library of examples there. I think, yeah, I wouldn't be able to point you to like a single forum where somebody's, I'm sure there's like a Discord or something where there's full of people learning it, I think. But yeah, there's plenty of videos as well. So it's been around for that long, so you've got so much to look at. The only problem I find is that you go and look at an example, you search for examples, and then you find something from 2014, and you try and copy it in, and it doesn't work, and you don't know why. That's a pain in the ass, but actually, once you know what those differences are, you can navigate around it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
If you wanted to manipulate the data set in a kind of more complex way than just fetching it, how would you normally go about that? Would you use R or Python, or incorporate a database?
There are like like kind of data manipulation, and there's like some basic stats and stuff, D3. But I would just recommend that like you clean it and use R or use Python or use whatever it is that you're already most productive in, and then it's kind of ready to go once it gets over to the. That's what I would recommend people do. Of course, you could use JavaScript to do that, but I think there's better tools. Yeah.
Thank you.
Use Python.
Anyone else?
Just interested to get your thoughts on Observable. I've noticed you had some examples there, and you just talked about it just there. How do you see that fitting into the data viz ecosystem? And also, I've kind of anecdotally heard, I'm not a JavaScript guy mainly, that D3 doesn't always play well with React and other frameworks. Whereas obviously in Observable, it's in a sandbox essentially environment with its own sort of JavaScript additions built in, right? So yeah, interested to get your thoughts on how that fits in.
Yeah, like I think I've got a little bit of a not a bone to pick with Observable, but I do find it's kind of like so when you use Observable, you have to set things out in a certain way. You have to learn a certain observableisms, which when you're already trying to learn D3 and you're looking at the library and you're looking at the API, and then you go back to Observable and you're like, what's going on here? So for example, in Observable, it does not matter the order in which you like write cells of code does not matter. It can just, one can refer to the other, and you're just like when you're new to it, I don't think this is helpful. And in fact, when I've done a few screencasts on D3, like I've actually took one or two examples from observable and like just sort of de-observabled them and just made it a normal web page. Like just like, look, here's like a pretty, like vanilla web page, HTML, and we're going to drop in D3, and in this script tag, we're going to write some D3, and we're going to go from not top to bottom. It's functional, but we're not going to worry about cells. We're not going to worry about I don't know. Can't remember what the concept is here. There's also in observable you can like import cells from other notebooks, and there's all this funky stuff, and it's absolutely fantastic and very productive when you're you've learned things. But yeah, on this point, I sort of slightly disagree with something I said. Yeah, because a lot of the examples, the modern examples, have been moved to observable, and I'm not entirely agree with that. I feel like it could do with some like soft intro. I can see definitely the benefits of using it, but yeah, I'm not. As for React, I haven't actually used D3 with React. I have used it with Angular, and I think it worked quite well. But I can't say about.
React just destroys the entire D3 thing. Like anytime you change anything on the page, the entire D3 just gets destroyed.
Yeah. You've got to do that. What is it? In React, you've got the use effect hook thing, refs. I don't know. I'm just saying React words. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you want to do some like normal JavaScript in the React. You've got to use like the only do this once thing. Don't do it every time the React state changes. Do you know what I'm talking about? Something like that. There's something like that you can do when you want to like alter states like with like just the normal way. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Well, there's okay. So I think if I ever have to do it, there's a library out there that maybe just like manages it for you. So yeah, I think that's lots of time. Cool.
Anyone else?
Thank you for the presentation. Sure. Just want to know how you integrate testing with using D3.
Test, right? Does it look pretty? No. Just use your regular JavaScript testing framework. Everything's fully tested before it arrives to the front end. Yeah. Yeah. I literally have no answer. I'm not joking. I really have never set up tests on a data visualization using D3. Never done.
Sorry.
I should.
I suppose actually, if you can check the data's in the correct format, then.
Yeah, maybe there's step 4, and maybe I could set up a test to say, hey, I've got this data. You should create, here, this number of elements, or you could set up tests like that, definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rory.
You're welcome.
Cool. So we'll be back in a month. Check the Twitter and Meetup for details of when that will be announced, which will hopefully be in the next few days. I'm sure Esteban has been in contact with a lot of you already, hammering the messages on meetup.com, asking for people if they want to do talks. So if you want to do a little intro to yourself or the stack or a technical talk, please do get in touch. And I will hopefully see you in a few weeks' time. Thank you.